mean, you guys take these things out and you thrash on them for hours on end. You have to understand tuning strategies for engines that have to endure, that run endurance type events.
Welcome to the Motorsports and Driver Development Show. I'm Katie.
I'm Keto.
And today we are joined with Scott Clark, who is the founder and chief calibration engineer at RealTuners. Welcome.
Thanks, guys. How's it going?
Great.
It's going great.
Beautiful day here in Seattle.
Likewise, I'm Southwest Iowa, and it's a nice day out here. It's like 70 degrees. I got the window open. It's a nice day.
Good. Oh, sounds great. Okay, start us off. For people who don't even know, can you just explain to us what tuning is and what a calibration engineer does?
Well, tuning can mean a lot of different things. Probably I should start with a calibration engineer. Specifically, I work in, well, it's not just motorsports, but mainly motorsports. And I configure electronic controls for various powertrains. Usually it starts with an engine, the fuel injection computer or controller. It's my job to make sure that thing is set up and working properly where an engine can do whatever the assigned task is without hurting itself and while being, as efficient and powerful as possible, depending on the application. So mainly an electronics guy, a computer guy, taking care of the computerized controls of whatever it is that you're using. It could be anything. I mean, you think of race cars. I've tuned forklifts with drive-by-wire that were emissions compliant that run on propane. I've tuned stationary engines that run natural gas compressors. I've tuned IndyCar engines, Cosworth DFEs, just anything that's computer controlled and centers around internal combustion. That's what the typical calibration engineer takes care of. So as far as being a tuner, I mean, you could go on at that for hours. There were tuners long before there were electronic calibration engineers. Guys, you can in my field in drag racing, there's chassis tuners. There's, people who pick the parts, the torque converter, that kind of stuff. So there's a lot to it. I don't really like to say I'm a tuner of all things. I'm very specific into the electronics.
Except you just said you tune forklifts. So before we get into the cool stuff like drag racing, I'm curious, what are you optimizing for on a forklift?
A lot of times it'll be emissions compliance. So in the last 10 years, a lot of different fields, like engines that were not road-going vehicles, started to have to become emissions compliant. And a lot of people got away from diesel engines and got into propane and natural gas because it's much easier to make those be emissions friendly and carbon footprint friendly, which is a good thing. I mean, I feel good about that. It's making it so a manufacturer can sell 10,000 of these forklifts that run properly and meet those emissions laws and regulations and aren't asphyxiating people in the warehouse when they're driving them around, that kind of thing.
Right.
Yeah, makes sense.
So I think a lot of people have a misconception that tuning is only in the aftermarket. Or engine calibration is only in the aftermarket, but what it sounds like is a forklift was for a manufacturer for like an OEM.
It was. I call it the tier 2 OEMs. I mean, I don't generally work for guys like Ford or General Motors. They usually keep their own calibration engineers on staff, right? But there are smaller companies. I've done work for companies that manufacture and sell boats. Hey, make our engine compliant and work as a contractor for us for 6 months or 12 months or however long it takes to go through all the testing, and then the validation in the field. You have to make sure that it stays compliant over time. So there's a lot of work out there, that helps pay the bills if motorsports is slow. Motorsports was more of the fun side of the job for me. But, there's a lot of what I will call second-tier OEM contract type work.
All right.
Super interesting. So how did you get started doing what you do?
Probably just like Keto. I mean, I've known we've kind of did this together over the last 20 years, but I started as a hobby, right? It was interesting. A lot of my local friends around here, it was drag racing in the Midwest. In some places is like for you guys, it's rallycross. Just whatever the local motorsport my friends were hanging out in. I was the IT guy, and so I inherited the job amongst all my circle of 10 or 15 friends of figuring out the fuel injection when they wanted to put a turbocharger or a supercharger on their street car, to make it faster. You had to start getting into the computer control on the computer controlled engines. There were two approaches at that time. You either tried to figure out and reverse engineer and hack your way through changing a factory built computer to do that, or you went out and found an aftermarket controller and that you, in our case, you would build from scratch. I started off with the Megasquirt world, was one of the early contributors to that project. And what that was a group of guys who got together who didn't want to pay $4,000 or $8,000 for the very rare electronics that you could do this stuff with at the time. So I started off with the Megasquirt world, which was neat because it would allow me to do very low cost what it cost other people a lot more money to do. And I have it here in my notes that one of the things about starting with Megasquirt was that it allowed me to get experience rapidly. So it was I started off with the Megasquirt stuff and then strictly a hobby. And then maybe 10 years into it became a side hustle, another 5 years. And then it was clear that the side hustle would make as much money as the IT job. And I came upon a good opportunity to kind of dip my feet in the water, if you will, with full-time work as a calibration engineer. And that went well. So I've never really decided I needed to go back to IT management. Yay. Right? That's the dream, living the dream.
So talking about the dream job, we don't have to talk about the forklifts. I'm curious, what kind of projects do you work on now?
So it's interesting. I mean, I just, motorsports, should I keep that motorsports focused or in general, what all kind of things? I mean, I've got.
Motorsports are going to be the cool answers, but we want to hear the all.
Yeah.
Oh.
Okay. So a recent project I did in the last year, there was a major city on the East Coast that has a number of these large old 1950s era diesel engines that power their generators. And they were looking to make these things more efficient, more energy, or I guess trying to reduce their carbon footprint, make them more efficient, fuel efficient and emissions compliant. Not really compliant. There weren't any rules about it, but they were experimenting with that. So I helped to build a custom electronic system to inject different types of fuels in along with the diesel fuel or the heavy oil that these things ran. And, and got to test the results with a group of engineers from Bosch and Ricardo, which was really kind of cool. I mean, that's some of more of the industrial stuff, but motorsports wise, right now, this next couple of weeks, getting ready to attend an engine dynamometer test, which, everybody, all your listeners are familiar with the chassis or engine dyno tests. This one is a roughly 4,000 horsepower gas turbine engine that powers the world's fastest wheel-driven vehicle at Bonneville, the Vesco team's Turbinator. Turbinator 2 is the name of that car. Gas turbine, wheel-driven, all-wheel drive streamliner that has it's been trap speed recorded at just over 500 miles an hour, but they haven't set a record over 500. The only cars faster than this one have thrust propulsion. This one is gas turbine drives the wheels. It's a helicopter engine out of a Chinook helicopter, and they use that to go ahead.
So runs through a gearbox then?
Yeah, it does. It's interesting how that works, right? So it's called a free air turbine, and I didn't know much about these until this last year when I started working on this project. But I guess it's like an air torque converter, if you will. There's a gas turbine runs a couple of stages of compressors, much like a turbocharger, and then it blows hot air on another fan that's hooked to the gearbox. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So I'd call it the hot air torque converter approach. But that's really how it works. So it's a single speed, single gear. The gearbox is a 2-to-1. The input shaft is 16,000 RPM nominal at the end of the run. So it's turning 8,000 RPM out the end of the gearbox, which is just about like a piston engine would be doing. And then hooked to your regular, it's nothing's regular or common about a streamliner. Keto's seen the Bonneville stuff for years, but it's an all-wheel drive deal. It's worth Googling, the Turbinator 2, Turbinator. Take a look at it. World's fastest wheel-driven vehicle. We're trying to get a record over 500 miles per hour. We averaged that in the last mile. It requires good conditions. But that's the weirdest thing I'm working on. I did yesterday, I remote tuned a pulling tractor with twin engines. It had, for tractor pullers here in the Midwest, it had 2 General Motors LS based, really, aftermarket build, big build engines, probably 2,000 to 2,500 horsepower apiece. And there were 370 cubic inch, twin Garrett turbine, twin Borg Warner turbines of some type. I think Jose at Forced Inductions, his custom turbochargers that he does. But I tuned that yesterday, and I'm going to get ready to meet him here in another week, hopefully for actual testing in the field, literally.
Methanol power?
What's that?
Methanol?
Yes, it's on methanol, and there's no cooling system in it, so it's all filled. So, it can run for 3 or 4 minutes before it gets too hot. So it's really similar to a drag racing engine combo. Gosh, let's see what else. Yeah, I could go on for hours. I mean, we've got an hour, right? But I have tons of weird stuff. It's just like, again, I've worked with alongside Keto for years. I've known him on the Messenger and the Facebook and different social medias, forums and formats as they've changed over time. But same thing for him. I mean, we'll work on anything, just the weirder the better. It's good it gives you good experience to do a BMW V12 and a Range Rover, that nobody else in the world ever thought of. Who would do that? Right?
So I know you have been part of what do they call it? Engine Masters, the competition.
Engine Masters Challenge. Yeah, I competed in that when it was a thing.
So give us some idea of some records maybe that you've been a part of.
I installed fuel injection systems. What was neat about Engine Masters Challenge, let me give a background there. You can Google Engine Masters Challenge now. It's now a defunct competition. There's still people out there using the name. David Freiberger and Steve Dulcich do videos called Engine Masters, which is kind of an offshoot from that theme. But originally it was a competition, and it was you'd submit your engine proposal. There were class rules just like any other type of racing, and you would submit your proposal to build a compliant engine a year ahead of time, and they would pick 50 teams. Right now, you're building an engine that's so volatile because the goal is to make maximum torque per cubic inch, but they say it's maximum average horsepower in a target RPM range. So some years it was 3,000 RPM to 7,000 RPM. Let's say that's a typical year. This contest went from the late 90s or early 2000s all the way up to 15 or 16, something like that. But it was put on by Popular Hot Rodding Magazine, Streetcars, Drag Racers, Hot Rod Crowd. And again, the goal was to build the most efficient engine that would make the most power over that certain RPM range on an engine dyno test. And they held it at the University of Northwest Ohio, which had a really good motorsports facility, multiple dyno rooms. The dyno manufacturer would send guys out to calibrate the dynos. It was a big event. Usually about 35 teams showed up because invariably 10 or 15 or 20 of them, the teams that were invited, would break their engine on the dyno the week before the event and couldn't put something back together. That's the kind of testing you do. You wear out 20 engines trying to optimize the package that'll win at the event. The coolest thing, to me, the most memorable part of Engine Masters Challenge, I worked with a guy, let's see, I got a phone call from this guy, Danny Miller, and he's no longer with us. Rest in peace. Good dude. But he contacts me, and I do some homework on him, and he's a Hemi engine builder, an early Hemi, the first generation of Chrysler Hemis that came out in the mid-1950s. Him and a guy from Northern California, Gene Adams, built some of the fastest drag racing early Hemis. They would run them on nitromethane with blowers, just like top fuel engines. They were the old school top fuel engines. They still use that engine in A fuel classes and a number of classes, but nostalgia drag racing, these guys were national level champions at various nostalgia drag racing events for the NHRA on the West Coast. And he contacted me and he said, hey, look, we compete in this Engine Masters Challenge thing, and we want to test electronic fuel injection, and it's a weird application, and your name came up. So would you be interested in trying to make our early Hemi do better than it does on carburetors? And we'll cover your travel or whatever. Let us know what equipment you can bring. We'll figure it out. And so I went out to work with them, and there's good documentation on the internet. If you Google Engine Masters Challenge early Hemi, there's a number of years we competed with this. But so 2010 was our first year, and we got it to the event, and the engine had an air bubble, wouldn't fill with coolant, and it overheated and cracked a cylinder head and blew a head gasket out. And so we did not finish. That was 2010, but the bug, it kind of bit me. 2011, at the beginning of the 2011 season, we were putting things together. It was about this time. It was early May of the 2011 season, and all of a sudden we get a message from one of our friends that Dan just died of a heart attack. The project manager died of a heart attack, and which sucks because he wasn't that old and he was very healthy. He exercised every day. He was a retired Los Angeles police officer. He was the instructor for the defensive driving school for all of the Los Angeles police officers. So he was really well known. If you're an LA cop, you went to Danny's driving school, right? Well, he was an engine builder on the side and one of the best. Anyway, he passed away of a sudden heart attack, and here's this project. The event was in October, and it was in May. We were just getting started. We hadn't even met Danny's wife hardly. The one time I had met her prior, she came out into the garage and told us to turn that damn thing off. It's 2:00 in the morning. He started up an A-fuel nitromethane. Sorry, no, it was a junior fueler, a nitromethane engine for us in his garage. And of course, it was like 2 in the morning, and his wife comes out to shout at us, tells us to turn it off. That was all I'd ever met Elaine. And so, we didn't really know what we were doing. There was a team of maybe 6 or 7 guys that were involved. There was me, the electronic specialist. There was another guy helping with the wiring. There was an intake airflow specialist that was designing the intake manifold and the exhaust. There was the machinist and engine assembler, John Beck at John Beck Racing Engines. Gene Adams was consulting on this. He was providing all sorts of parts and experience. Hotheads Research in North Carolina was providing the cylinder heads and castings and stuff like that for us. So a lot of people were involved, and we were all just kind of stuck. And interestingly, one of the crew chief for the team he contacted Danny's wife and said, are you interested in keeping this going at all? And no, she wants to sell everything he has. And what happened was, sorry for the long story, but it has a good ending. She ended up contacting one of the guys a few months later saying, hey, I've got this barn full of stuff that Dan collected over the years for nostalgia drag racing stuff, right? And Keto knows where this is going. She's like, do I just auction this stuff off for like $10,000 or $5,000 or something? Or, what do I do? And I mean, Keto, he had like 3 Bridgeports in there that were in mint condition, and he had, all sorts of fabricating, welding equipment stuff. He had magnesium case blowers from the 1960s, the stuff that Don Garlitz would have run. Anyway, the guys told her, hey, the stuff you have in there is extremely valuable. Why don't you let us come up there? We'll tag it. We'll identify it. We'll help you sell it. And it ended up being like over $1 million worth of stuff. And so she said, so, hey, as a gift, I'm going to go ahead and fund you guys' 2011 Engine Masters campaign. And we went there. We did good. I think we finished 6th or 5th out of the 35 that showed up, or the 50 invites in 2011. And she went with us, Elaine Miller, Danny's widow. And she had so much fun that she funded it again for 2012. And we actually went back with an engine that was cast with a cylinder head, an engine block that was cast in 1954. Now we're competing against late model, super incredibly high-tech engines with this old jalopy that really had all the right parts internally. We finished in 2nd place by just a smidgen to Brad Nagel with a late Hemi a Generation 3 brand new late Hemi with all the optimizations and better cylinder head design and all that stuff. So it ended up being a really cool deal. It's really well documented out there on the internet too. You can kind of Google search that story. But that was probably my coolest motorsport story, and it's a really long one. I apologize for that.
It's all good. You hit on something, though, that is a personal concern of mine. Now, I hope Keto lives forever. I think he's pretty great, but I really hope he lives forever, or at least longer than me, because I have no idea what I would do with all of his cars and the warehouse full of equipment and parts. And so maybe I'll call you, Scott. I'm not sure.
Yeah. Here's a hint. Don't sell him for what he tells you that he paid for the parts. Whatever you do, don't do that. Contact a friend and have them come and help you figure out that you could probably survive for many years on the sales of stuff Keto's collected.
That's almost like really comforting.
Right.
All right.
Oh, I know he's a collector of many weird and exotic and weird things, mechanical. So.
And, he gets some positive reinforcement anytime he has the need for something kind of obscure. When he goes and he finds it, and he's like, see, this is why I keep the stuff.
That's right.
Right. Yeah. Until it's time to move the stuff.
All right, let's shift gears a little bit. Let's talk about specific to most of the people listening and watching are going to be people who are either into rally or autocross, rallycross,
right.
things like that. I'm curious if there are different kinds of tuning strategies for different kinds of motorsports.
There are, for sure. So you look at the big horsepower drag racing stuff only has to run for 6 or maybe 8 seconds at wide open and full power. The cars that Keto builds, I mean, you guys take these things out and you thrash on them for hours on end. You have to understand tuning strategies for engines that have to endure, that run endurance type events, which really, I don't even care if a rallycross is short. It's still endurance to me. If it's more than 6 or 8 seconds, it's got to live. I guess to go into without going into an hour-long story, but the long and short of it is as you have an engine under full power, the temperature of the combustion chambers goes up dramatically over time, and it increases the burn rate of the fuel. It burns faster, so you have to take timing out. In other words, don't run the engine ignition timing that makes the most power on the dyno. Back it way off and make it so that it lives for a long time, because you don't want to go out there and make tons of power for 6 seconds in a race that takes 2 minutes or 10 minutes or however long. So that's the gist of it, is to make sure you understand what an endurance type engine or a stationary engine, is doing. I have customers that race airplanes at Reno, and it's the same thing. It's almost the same kind of tuning as an engine that sits there making full power the whole time. It takes some real thought. You can't just crank it up on the dyno for a quick pull and call it good.
That's really interesting.
Right. Yeah.
It's probably.
Does she really think that's interesting, Keto?
No, I actually didn't know that. So.
No, that's good. That's awesome. She is awesome. I've known Keto for years. This is my first time meeting Katie. So
you can literally see me blushing on the camera. That's great.
I can. Sorry.
So this is probably a good time to talk a little bit about, specifically in rallycross, what kind of tuning is allowed for the different classes.
Right. So in stock class, for example, there's no tuning that's allowed yet. You have to run the stock ECU in stock form. In prepared, you're allowed to use the stock ECU, but you can change the tune that's on there.
Apply to.
When in the modified class, it's open. So, if you want to do an engine swap and you want to put a standalone, then you can definitely do that. And we have a handful of guys who are in the process or have just done standalones, and the most common used is Megasquirt. So what would you tell these guys who want to get into it? What are good resources for getting information? At what point do they seek maybe professional help as opposed to let the project die? What would you say?
Well, so do you mean specific to Megasquirt or standalones in general? Really, it could be standalones in general, but I mean, you got to find the hub for that user community. For the Megasquirt guys, it's the MS Extra. It's still an internet forum, and you can still search it, and you can see my post from 15 years ago on there, struggling to get the first LS to run on Megasquirt, that kind of stuff. So you find the social media hub, and you do your research. The more reading you do, the better. which really is a good segue into the second part of your question. When's it time to get professional help? As soon as your struggle becomes not fun anymore, right? So a good example, and that applies to anything. Keto is a great fabricator. I couldn't make two pieces of stick welding stuff stick together. That to me is not fun. So that's when I would seek professional help if I was looking for someone to build my chassis and set up the entire car, really. Electronics and wiring, I'm comfortable with, but a lot of guys don't like the wiring. I say dabble with it a little bit and make sure that you don't like it. And if you don't, then it's time to go get professional help, compartmentalize it for whatever your specific need is. And that's probably, that's my answer to the second part there, really.
Do you think now picking like a standalone or a particular type of software to tune your factory ECU, would you pick something like your favorite tuner is familiar with, or would you pick the software and find a tuner? Which one's more important, you think?
I would pick whatever the local guy near me who I can get my hands around their neck if I have to. Don't make your favorite tuner an internet guy. You can't believe everything you see on the internet, but you want to find a guy that you actually have seen in person, customers of his that are satisfied, and has a good reputation. You find that guy, he's going to be busy, he might be a little more expensive, but there's a reason for that. But yeah, I think that's really the way to do it, I think.
And so guys who are installing a standalone, what do you think are their biggest pitfalls? Like, where do you see most of the mistakes that are being made? Is it in the wiring, or is it in like the initial setup, or where do you find most of the errors when people finally put their hands and bring you a car?
Number one is the installation with the wiring. A lot of times the manufacturers themselves don't give good instructions for proper power and grounds. They just say, have a lot of good grounds, have good power. I've studied signaling pretty in depth in the career I'm in right now. And, you look at a phenomenon called noise coupling. That's as described by Bosch in their many years of Bosch automotive handbooks, and they have books specific to signaling if you want to get into that stuff, educational, collegiate level engineering books. But the Bosch automotive handbook does do a nice, simple job of describing coupled noise. And that's probably the number one problem I solve. People get the car running, but it's got an ignition misfire or breaks up at a certain RPM. That's what I run into most when I'm doing remote tunes and troubleshooting for people. So I guess that's part of the installation, but part of that is a frustration from the manufacturers that don't provide good info. I mean, for example, some of the older Megasquirt documentation says, hey, ground your ECU to the engine block. It's literally the most horrible place you could put it, because it's going to couple the grounds for the ECU to all the ignition noise and starter noise that's traveling through the engine block, versus giving it a dedicated run to the battery. And I'm glad you asked that question. That's a good question. Probably the next most common problems I find is most people contact me when they can't get the car to start or run the first time with a new install. I'm sure you run into that a lot.
Yeah.
I guess I snipe those guys. I see them on social media. Oh man, my car won't start. I'm like, hey, for a very low price, I'll get money back guarantee. I'll walk you through getting it running and everything else. And another mistake they make is they try so hard that they'll end up damaging the engine before the thing even runs right. We've all seen that. So I tried to kind of specialize my services for that crowd in the area of getting them started running in a base tune where it's safe to drive the car, wide open throttle. Maybe they have to work on cold start and warm up a little bit, or I work with them on it later. But really, those are probably the most common areas where people struggle.
I would also say I run into a lot of guys who feel like a standalone install is an all or nothing thing when it comes to getting help. They think that if they start it, that they have to finish it, that no one is there to help them. Or their other option is take an ECU into a shop, have them wired, do everything, get it, and then they get back a running, driving car.
You're right.
So it's good to know that there's people like you that they can go to partway through when they're getting a bind. Yeah. money back guarantee to get it started. Are you kidding me? If you get it started,
that binary mentality is bad news on the entire car project when you're building the car. Screw it, I give up. I'm just going to take this over to this shop and get hosed, and they're going to rip everything out I did. It doesn't really have to be that way. I think I am a fan of, farming out parts of the work that you need help with. That's how we try to provide services. And if you look at the OEM world, that's how they do it. They'll hire a contractor for a short term for a specific task.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
So you mentioned finding a local tuner, but then you talked about all the remote work you do. So does that mean somebody like you has a great reputation, who's been doing it a long time, could potentially be someone, like if you don't have a good tuner in your area?
Yeah. I mean, it depends. If I'm building a rallycross project and I live anywhere near you guys, I would go straight to Keto for advice on building the car and how much, how much work would he want to do? Hey, do you want to put the cage in this for me? And that guy, I would want to kind of patronize guys like that because I know where he's at skill level wise and have for years. But as far as the remote goes, yeah, I mean, a lot of things, if you're doing your own project yourself and you get stuck along the way, that's where the remote tuning comes in. I can't be there to make the cold start perfect every time, but I can show you how to make adjustments to get it perfect yourself. So really, I think the remote tuning is more helpful for people that are just need a push to get along and get things going, and they're kind of still do-it-yourselfer mentality. If you're a do-it-for-me guy, like if I was trying to get a car painted or body work done or do chassis fabrication work, no questions asked, I hire somebody I know.
Right.
I love your advice of when it's not fun, that's when you bring on.
Listen, that's the most important thing. I have a podcast, RealTuners Radio, shameless plug. The thing we try to convey to people is don't let your car project become unfun, too expensive. A lot of guys will build this car that's over the course of a 2 or 3 year build, the scope has changed dramatically from beginning to end. Oh, now I'm going to race in this modified class, but I started off in a prepared or a completely stock class. And so the build changes scope, the costs go up exponentially, and now you've got a car that you can't afford to even maintain and compete with reliably. So you really ought to not set your sights too far up, and you have to work your way up. I work with too many professional motorsports drag racer guys who are grumpy, because to stay competitive, they had to spend $1 million last year drag traipsing all over the country, for their X275 class type thing. It's taken the fun out of it. Honestly, at any point, this whole car thing, this hobby is for fun. You're doing it for fun, right? You play with model airplanes for fun. You play with whatever toys you have. Your hobby should be fun. So as soon as it becomes not fun, that's when it's time to spend a little bit of money. You know what I mean? And the other time is if you value your own hours, right? I mean, guys that work in the field, Keto knows what he's worth per hour. I know what I'm worth per hour. So me sitting down, screwing around, try to make a body filler work and make a car ready to paint and look nice and pretty, I'm way better off time-wise going and doing some tuning work for someone and then just giving that money to a paint and body guy.
Right,
yes.
right.
For as long as you have that mentality.
For as long as it would take you, you could probably make 10 times more money.
Exactly. and I can
you can have somebody do it right.
Right, exactly. Have them do it right, and then you're just satisfied. I didn't spend 46 hours frustrated on this car. I went and worked for 2 hours and paid some other guy to do it, and he did it in 3. That should be the mentality for every. I don't care what motorsport you're in. If you're not doing it professionally, if you're doing it as a hobby, that's the way you should approach it for sure.
I love it. So somebody who's listening to this episode may be interested in more tuning related things. Talk a little bit about your podcast and sort of what you cover on that.
So June of 2017, we started off, and actually it starts a little bit earlier than that. There's a drag race in Las Vegas every year, the Streetcar Super Nationals, and it's widely known for guys blowing their stuff up. It's the end of the season race, so everybody turns all the, every knob in the car goes to 11, and whether they know what it does or not, it's on 11, and this race is just well known for its oil downs, where on a drag race track, if you you blow it up halfway down, you splatter oil over the track. It ruins the track surface, and the guys have to spend time cleaning it up. The announcers are friends of mine, and somehow they said, man, we're really trying to kill 3 hours here while they clean up this latest mess. Why don't you just come up here and get on our live stream and answer some EFI questions for people? And so I started doing this at the Streetcar Supernats events, and I got in mind, I said, maybe I should do that full time. That might make a neat live stream as opposed to, a Twitch channel, people watching somebody play Call of Duty or whatever. So I started off just as a Facebook stream in June of 2017 and very quickly learned to convert it to an audio podcast. Added video a few months later. It's the video production isn't great. It's still a one-man show. But we've gotten to the point where we're approaching 1 million total views and downloads in less than 3 years, and which is weird for a niche podcast. I converted it into kind of an advertising medium for my classes that I do. We'll talk about that later. But really, I wasn't trying to get a bunch of subscribers. I didn't have that in mind. It's probably a lot like your show. You're just doing this for the whatever size group of people who are interested in your topics and want to listen to it. Same thing. I didn't start off saying, I'm going to monetize and we're going to do all this. In fact, I have yet to monetize. I just don't care about that. But we've gotten to the point where we've had guests on now. It started off just EFI tuning talk, but now it's tuning just about anything. Chassis tuning, suspension guys, torque converter guys have been on there, fuel system guys. Jeff Stacy from Aeromotive has given two-hour sessions where he literally just sits there and takes questions from the audience real time and really hardcore technical questions where we're known for our hardcore tech. And the theme of the whole reason behind the name RealTuners is people who actually work in the industry. The problem with the tuning business is, 8 out of 10 guys are really trying to make themselves look like they do more than they actually do, or, don't have they're trying to kind of puff up themselves, I guess, on social media or whatever, which is fine. That's everybody's platform. That's what some people do. I guess they're the Instagram models of our business. But I really, so anyway, where was I going with that? We started RealTuners, started doing this podcast, started having more and more guests. Probably our top shows, the Aeromotive fuel system guy always does a good job. Shannon Davis, who develops traction control products for straight line type cars. He did a really good high-tech episode. Justin Shearer, and for those of you that ever watched Street Outlaws, I'm not a TV guy, but I've done a lot of work for the guys in the 405 area code. So and a lot of people actually have Street Outlaws in New Orleans. I've taught private classes for groups of those guys. But Justin Shearer, Big Chief, the lead guy on that show, and he has a TV show on Discovery Channel that at its peak, every Monday night, 3.5 million people would sit down to watch. It was the most watched television show for a long time. And he was on that TV show. And, everybody expects Justin to get on there and give us a TV interview, right? No. He gives us 2 hours of everything technical he knows about getting a drag race car to go down a track, different surfaces, tuning, how he learned it, how he approached it, what he did wrong, what he thought he did right. It's an absolutely spellbinding episode where you think it's going to be some egomaniacal TV show guy, and it's somebody who's really down to earth. And I mean, I had people send me these crazy, almost love letters, how cool they thought that was that we convinced Big Chief to do just like an interview about the tech behind his car. And it was good for him because it let people know, hey, they make a lot of money per episode now, but he still is in charge of everything on that car. And they are world class. You're talking guys that on unprepared surfaces that their cars will run an eighth mile, 660 feet in 4.4 seconds from a dead stop. So, I mean, they're going over 200 miles per hour by the end of that. So say what you will about Street Outlaws, but the technology, it's some of the most advanced technology there is in drag racing.
That's so interesting.
So if somebody wanted to get into one of your classes or get more information, where would they go to sign up for a class? And if you don't have a class in that area, how many people do they need to get together to get you to come up there and teach a class?
Gotcha. I mean, if you have typically I'll get contacted by a dyno shop owner or somebody who's friends with a dyno shop, and and say, hey, I got a dozen guys or more here that want to get together and have a class, that's a workable thing. I'll travel just about anywhere for that, provided the whole travel restriction thing goes away. I currently have 3 classes on somewhat of a temporary hold, but a class in Florida, West Palm or Palm Bay, coming up here in June. A class. I'm going to have to reschedule this one in Fort Worth, Texas. Another one in Springfield, Missouri at 417 Motorsports, where a friend of mine, Blake Hughes, has a really cool fabrication shop for drag racing stuff. Really popular place to have a class. Those always sell out. I don't let any more than 20 people in, just so that I can actually make sure everybody leaves the class knowing that they can go home and get their car running. You know, and one of the things about my classes is if they need it, I'll offer an hour of free remote support for anybody who attended when it comes time to get their car fired up and running. As Keto knows, that's the hardest part, right? I mean, once you get it started and idling, you're home free, you know, aside from some other bugs or whatever. But so where our home base is online is RealTuners.com. Real simple. We're also on Facebook as RealTuners LLC is the business page. There is a RealTuners radio podcast fan page. That's a mouthful. That most of our subscribers and listeners are in. That's where you can kind of ask questions beforehand or suggest guests, see what's coming up. I kind of give them the first dibs on the classes when they come out. The classes tend to sell out pretty quick. But also at RealTuners.com in the interim, we have a couple of webinars up there. You know, I have a how to get your Megasquirt car started up the first time and running. You know, first start, staging, and base tuning type stuff. There's a webinar in our store. You can see in the menu. It tells you, it kind of points you in the right direction. We got some videos there that show some of the different things that we've tuned, some of the weird stuff. So kind of gives you an idea of what we do.
What is the premise of the classes that you travel and offer? Is it like
standalone EFI tuning, getting the engine running yourself? It's not just drag racing. I get all sorts of people, but people who want to be able to put a Holly or a Fuel Tech or a Big Stuff 3 or a Fast, or I'm starting to get more guys Haltech. A Megasquirt is still a really popular one. So any of those kind of popular systems on reasonably standardized type of engines. You got 80% of the guys out there are putting these on late model General Motors engines. The rest of it is, comprised of Mopar, Ford, Honda imports, that kind of stuff. But basically any of those types of applications, just to get yourself up, running, and tuning, and independent of being hooked on having to have that binary mindset we talked about of, I just got to take this to some guy and just put whatever he wants on it, just write him a big check. The goal is that in our classes, you can do that yourself, or you at least can come out of the class being able to make competent decisions so you get the most out of your money on your project. That's kind of that's the theme of my classes. And I think that's where we differ from some of the others. There's other classes you can take that have fancier websites, better video production, and more formal classroom format. Mine's more hands-on. We'll all gather around a car on a dyno and I'll speak. We'll all take turns tuning, make a dyno pull. We'll look at data logs for a half hour, that kind of stuff. It's really geared towards hands-on, less theory and more, hey, here's just what you need to know to get running. Give the car what it wants and you develop your theory later on as to why that is. So hands-on, T-shirt, blue jeans type of classes.
Yeah, I love that. I love that you are enabling people to do some of the work themselves, if not all of it.
Oh, yeah.
I think that maybe this is rally, maybe it's other types of motorsports, but it seems like people really love to get involved in the process of getting to the start line.
Call it karma or whatever you want, but there is some kind of good energy that comes back from having that mentality. Give us a little bit of money to pay for the travel and the weekend work, and then we will show you, kind of turn you on to a way of thinking that lets you go down your own path.
Yeah, definitely. So you have done some very interesting things. What would be your ultimate dream project to work on?
The one that I haven't yet. I mean, where else is there? Formula One, probably, right? Keto, what's your ultimate dream? I mean, what would you?
I don't know about Formula One.
not Formula One, but maybe. I mean, I don't know, professional level rally racing, right? I mean, it's something, where the OEMs typically do the work, and we're kind of the outsiders. But it would be neat to work on an engine program for a Formula One group, something like that, or be part of a team like that.
Yeah.
I don't know. It's probably not something that'll ever happen for me, but I've just about covered all the other bases. We've done race boats, race airplanes, just you name it, we've done it. But yeah, I would like to work on a Formula One project, maybe a lower budget Formula One team would be kind of fun, where you have to be a little more crafty because you don't have $500 million a year to spend. You only have $140 million. Poor people.
So if Gene Haas is listening.
Yes, Gene. Exactly.
Phone number is.
I would love to. The problem is, don't they farm out? Do they farm out to Renault for their engine program?
At Haas,
who are they?
R-rated, please. So they do get the entire engine package, including software, is Ferrari based, and they just have tunes to select from. Is what I know.
See, he knows way more about it than I do already. It just looks like a lot of fun because I watched the Netflix show. That's literally my knowledge of Formula One. But it seems like something that would be fun to do.
I noticed neither of you said spaceships. I feel like those probably have some pretty intricate engine controls, no?
Solid rocket. I don't.
Pretty much either it works or it fails dramatically and horribly. Right? Actually, didn't. So who? Oh my gosh, who was our mutual friend Keto that I talked to from? Yes, he actually got me an interview years ago, or an interest. They asked me to do an interview. I ended up not being able to do it because of other job commitments. But at where he was working at the time.
At the space
yeah. So, and I recently just made a visit to Spaceport America. Man, I should talk about that project a second. If you followed that or not, follow RealTuners. One of the neat things we just did this year so far, Dan Parker is a guy who is a world champion pro mod drag racer. Early 2000s won a world championship, and in 2008 was in a crash that almost killed him and made him blind permanently. And this guy is crazy and super talented machinist. I mean, we met him. He's on our show occasionally on the podcast as a host. We met him because he was teaching, as a blind guy, teaching a machine shop class to a high school, right? Like a regular employed teacher, blind guy, teaching machine shop. Think about that for a minute. He's still got all of his fingers and toes. Well, he messaged me and says, "Man, we listened to your podcast. Thanks for not cussing too much." And his interesting compliment was, "Thank you for having good audio." One of the guys on my podcast is as a sound engineer for A-level customers. So think like Celine Dion and people who sing on The Voice and things like that. And he lives out in Las Vegas and he does professional tours. George Strait doesn't start a tour without Scott Evans setting up part of his sound. So anyway, Scott helps us with the sound. And of course, it's a broadcast good quality. We all had to go out and buy $1,000 microphones and stuff like that to satisfy him. But anyway, Dan contacted me and said, "Hey, we really like your audio. Thanks." And I make my class listen to I tape the episodes and my class listens to them or whatever. And I got to hear it talking to him and got to be friends with him. But long story short, Dan built himself a C6 Corvette to go land speed racing with, okay, and blind. So he has a friend who's an engineer at Boeing who designed him a navigation system that I'm not convinced that this didn't come out of like a guided missile system or something. Like it's got gyroscopes, it's got accelerometers. It's got GPS, like a real high sample rate GPS, and it's all in this box and that looks like it belongs in a DARPA project. But anyway, he's got this in his car. Me and my friends on RealTuners got together and helped him get the EFI tuned up and running. And then we went out and crewed for him at this event a few months ago at Spaceport America, and they actually came out and filmed a Jay Leno's Garage episode about it, which will be out in June here. But check out Dan Parker. He's at theblindmachinist.com. Is his website, and he is a neat dude. You can actually buy stuff that he makes to help support his race program. Like he sells these really cool executive pens. He makes these razors, all kinds of cool stuff that he machines himself, and it's really neat, billet, cool, high quality stuff that gearheads want. Like Keto absolutely wants the razors, right? Well, he sells this stuff to support his race habit. You know, he won't accept any charity of any kind, but raised enough money selling executive pens to go racing with him. So Dan Parker's kind of a neat story. That was probably another one I should have listed as one of the coolest things I've done.
I think I've heard about this guy. Is he the guy who uses tones right ear, left ear to find out if he's going straight, right?
Correct. Yep. Audible tones.
I read about this, and so he's gone pretty fast already, hasn't he?
We went 153 in the vet on a shakedown run, but there were 25-mile-an-hour crosswinds, gusts to like 40, and it was just too windy to try for the 200-plus mile-per-hour record. Car set up to go 220-plus. He also set a record at Bonneville on a motorcycle, sidecar motorcycle, two-stroke little 80cc thing. There was an open record there, and that's where they prototyped the system. So he did that 2013, I think, 2014. But yeah, it's a interesting guy, hardcore racer, neat dude, real funny, real hilarious sense of humor. The best thing about Dan, sense of humor. You have to check him out. He's worth looking at. There are guys that will video him. I remember there was a video of him working something on a Bridgeport, and the guy's blind, right? And he's got special micrometers that speak the measurement audibly, you know what I mean? Some really neat tools. And he, there's a video of him 6 minutes long making something. He's like, oh, damn it, I got to throw this away. It's 10 thousandths off, you know, and then nobody knows that he's on the live stream on a video. It's just an interesting guy with a cool sense of humor and dealing with the stuff being blind. You know, he's got some hilarious mottos too, like, you know, the bright side of being blind every day is an Easter egg hunt. When we were, and he was the one that pointed out that certain underwear manufacturers started putting tags on the front, you know, and he said, it took me like 3 months of discomfort to figure out, you know, that I've got my underwear on backwards, that kind of stuff.
That's a real thing. I've noticed that.
Oh, it is a real thing. It's a real thing.
Oh my God.
He's a funny guy. So anyway, worth checking out, theblindmachinist.com.
Blindmachinist.com, two things there. One, I feel like there's a lesson in resilience and tenacity there that we should all just take away. And two, I really would like that system with the tones, trying to keep people going straight. I feel like there's a lot of drivers around here in Seattle that could use a little something.
They call it lane departure, and most cars have it now.
That doesn't seem to be working. Anyway.
They have to be listening to start with.
That's true. Scott, thank you so much for joining us today. I feel like the show notes on this one are going to be so long. You provided so many good resources. But just as a quick reminder, where can people find you online? RealTuners.com. Also on Facebook at RealTuners LLC. You can Google search the RealTuners radio podcast. RealTuners is one word. But it's available on all the major podcast hosts as an audio feed. You can find it on YouTube at RealTuners Radio, where you can get the video feed. Sometimes the pictures are nice to see and see the faces that go along with the voices. But mainly we're focused on good audio. That really pretty much covers it. That's where we spend most of our time. That's awesome. So many good resources. Thank you again for your time.
Yeah, thanks for coming.
Thanks, you guys. It's always good to hear from you guys. And Keto, good to see you again. My dog T-Rex says hello. And Katie, it's nice to meet you finally.
You too. Thank you.
All right.